With all due respect, that's a bunch of malarkey. This is a bunch of stuff, deal.
What does that mean, a bunch of stuff?
Well, it means it's simply inaccurate.
It's Irish.
Exactly, it is. We Irish call it malarkey.
Thanks for the translation.
No, we Irish call it malarkey.
You know what this is? Yeah, and I reserve this word for those rare instances when it's truly deserved. This is malarkey.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
From the King Spring Studios here in Smyrna, Georgia, this is A Bunch of Malarkey. I'm your host, Charlie McMahon. Thank you so much for joining us on this March finale of the show. March going out like a lamb indeed. And we have a very special guest here today. Let's welcome Benji to the show. Benji, thanks so much for joining us.
Very special or somewhat special?
I think you're very special, Benji.
All right, I'll take it.
Now, Benji is no stranger to radio, right, Benji? You have a long, distinguished radio career, starting as a youngster.
I think distinguished is probably up for opinion, but a long time certainly, yeah. 29, this will be 29 years.
So I thought we would actually elevate the show a little bit by having a gentleman with lots of radio experience, especially for the topic we're going to be covering today, which we'll get to in just a bit. So, Benji, as you know, and you're the first person, now I thought of this the other night. I ran into Benji and his wife at a restaurant the other night when I was out with my wife and my in-laws. You're the first person in 8 years since I've lived in Georgia that I've run into. Because, you know, when you move to a new place, you don't know anybody. You just don't run into anybody. In New York, I would run into people all the time, mostly which I didn't want to run into. But you're the first person I've ever randomly run into that I knew since I've been here.
That may mean that you don't know enough people.
Well, it could be that, too. But we were out to dinner. Now, when you have company, folks, you break out of your routine. We had a great time with my in-laws, and I was sad to see them go, so was my wife. But you get out of your routine, you do things, you live your life a little bit more. You go out to dinner more, and I was like 10 pounds down, and, you know, for the year since my resolution, and I thought I put 5 back on. The last day they were here, I got on the scale, I'm like, holy shit, I gained half the weight back, but it turned out to be like 2.5. So you get out of your routine, folks, you gain some weight. But the crazy part, Benji, is I was talked into by my wife, I think she's trying to get rid of me or something, to go visit my in-laws in June. I'm going up to New York for the first time in 8 years. And we already have an itinerary of all the food places we're going to eat because I missed the New York food. So if I gained, say, 3 pounds in 5 days here, God only knows what's going to happen when I go up there, right?
Yeah, but that, special occasion.
Exactly. So what I'm doing right now is I am training specifically to lose weight so I can go back up to New York in June and gain weight. Does that make sense?
Is this where we cue the musical montage of the Rocky scene?
I think we should.
Running
I think
the steps. And
you never know. We might have something special planned for you. My wife and I came up with a pretty funny idea. So we might be seeing a video of that in the near future. So speaking of gaining or losing weight, I don't know if you heard about this story, Benji, or if our listeners did. An Ohio man didn't give up beer for Lent. He gave up everything else. Del Hall, who works at a brewery in Cincinnati, is on a very unusual diet of only beer. After 18 days of ingesting nothing but beer, he says he's lost 25 pounds. Do you call bullshit on that?
I do.
Hall has been recording his progress on Facebook, and he's starting to gain a lot of attention online. He says in one of his videos that he's trying to emulate how monks fasted in the 1600s. It's not necessarily about the weight loss as it is the challenge of replicating what monks did, Hall said. Hall did check with his doctor before starting the fast and says he takes a multivitamin every day. As to any health risks associated with his fast, he had this to say. I practice fasting for several years now. Also, I've tried to have as much fun as I can in my life. This is a challenge. I'm obese. I've used food as my fun for too many years. This is me hoping to correct that and come to a healthier relationship with food. Nearly halfway to the finish line, Hall has gone 21 days without eating any food. He does allow himself to drink coffee, black coffee that is, unsweetened tea, and an occasional sparkling water. He said the first few days were the hardest, and now the hunger comes in waves. Now, have you ever tried fasting or anything crazy like that in your life?
Not for multiple days, no.
No?
I mean, I've done juice fasts before and things like that, and short term, I don't think anything will hurt you, but anything too extreme for a long time is probably not a great idea.
Yeah, this fasting now is this like 18-hour fasting, and then you eat everything within like...
Oh, intermittent fasting.
Yeah, I don't think I can do that. I get very weak and cranky, and I'll probably end up killing somebody.
Yeah, I don't have a problem doing that, but whether it works or not, who's to say?
So, folks, I don't think that guy was too much of a mutant. He's marching to the beat of his own drum, and he's living his life. But why not springboard right into our favorite segment?
Mutant of the Week.
Now, folks, we had a landslide winner once again in last week's contest. In a 75 to 25% victory, the Olive Garden gobbler, the woman who is suing the Olive Garden for burning the back of her throat on a stuffed mushroom, beat the Snorer Sniper, the woman who shot her boyfriend for snoring too loudly. Once again, a 75 to 25% margin. So we thank you all for voting. If you don't know where to vote, folks, as we're going to be presenting our new nominees, it's on our Facebook page. Just go to Facebook, type in a bunch of malarkey in the search bar, and our poll goes up on Tuesday and ends on Saturday evening. So be sure to vote. And here are this week's nominees. Benji's going to present our first nominee.
A police officer in Texas may have been able to get his dismissal overturned for giving a homeless man a sandwich filled with feces, but is currently facing the wrath of the Twitterati over his sick act. Matthew Luckhurst of the San Antonio Police Department was able to keep his job over a technicality over the vile incident. After the vile incident, saw him picking up dog poop, placing it on a piece of bread, and then placing the sandwich in a styrofoam container in the guise of a half-eaten meal that had been provided by a local religious group for the homeless in the city.
Was it wheat or white?
Good question. Or pumpernickel.
Pumpernickel. It's nice on pumpernickel.
The sleeping man would eventually wake up, pick up the container, and may have eaten what was in it. Users on social media have not held back their disgust with the officer, said the Daily Mail. One said, San Antonio cop Matthew Luckhurst is a hashtag sick fuck. Another added, they should have punished that horrible person and he should have been fired, but that's the San Antonio PD for you. No morals and no justice. Another one said, sick, sick, sick. He's sworn to protect everyone. What a piece of garbage. Why does he still have a badge? Disgraceful man. And a fourth one said, what a cruel and disgusting human. He seems to either have a fetish for poop or is mentally a 6-year-old that never grew up. He should have been punished with eating his own feces sandwich.
I agree with that.
That's mutant number 1.
So what do you think? Do you think, what is he known as? What are we calling him this week?
The poop-preparing policeman.
That's a good one. Now, do you think he was just acting like a juvenile, or do you think he's got a sick, or do we not know enough about this guy?
I think we may need some more evidence, but it sounds like something's wrong with this guy. I don't know a lot of 6-year-olds that would go through with that. At some point, there's a sense of right and wrong that should kick in, right?
I'm thinking it had to be wheat or rye, though, because you know how that cheap Wonder Bread, you even try spreading peanut butter on that and it falls apart.
Right apart.
So I'm thinking he went with like a sturdier bread, like a pumpernickel of rye, perhaps a sturdy wheat.
Yeah.
So that's our mutant number 1. He is the poop preparing policeman, and that was out of Texas,
San Antonio.
Yeah, we've had quite a bit of Texas and Florida, and guess where mutant number 2 comes from?
Florida.
A Florida man, Brian Anderson of Dundee, Florida, called 911 to report an armed robbery. 2 unknown suspects took his money, his necklace, his cell phone. They threw the phone on the ground and smashed it. They jumped into a black Ford Crown Victoria and they sped away. Deputies quickly responded along with their air and canine units. That's a heck of a story, isn't it, Benji?
It is.
Well, aside from the very first and very last sentence, none of it was true. Deputies quickly learned that the robbery never happened and that Brian confessed that he made up the story because, everybody's sitting down out there, he didn't want to show up for his 11 a.m. shift at the Hardee's restaurant where he works. Brian was arrested and charged with misuse of 9/11 and knowingly giving false information to law enforcement. On the bright side, Brian didn't have to go to his 11 o'clock shift at the restaurant. Police got the last laugh, wouldn't you say in that, Benji?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So I'm going to call him the Hardy Har Har. So we got a pretty good battle this week, folks. Hardy Har Har versus the poop preparing policeman. So that's where we stand. So, Benji, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony took place the other night. Are you a big fan of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
I tape it every year.
Okay.
and I will watch the induction and the performances if there are any for the artists that I find interesting. But typically in a given year, I will skip over at least one
Right.
of the artists. Either I don't care or I don't know them.
Exactly. Well, this year, folks, it was held at the Barclays Center. I think it was the second or third year in a row in Brooklyn. Was this past Friday night. In case you missed it, The Cure, Def Leppard, Janet Jackson, Stevie Nicks, Radiohead, Roxy Music, and the Zombies were all inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So, folks, when it was founded back in 1983, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that is, there was no question who or what rock and roll was. It meant the founding fathers, Chuck Berry, James Brown, Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, Fats Domino, B.B. King, Bill Haley, Roy Orbison, Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard. I can go on. And the generation of bands and artists they spawned, like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Beach Boys, the Who, Bob Dylan, and Stevie Wonder. But some 36 years after that first batch of inductees, with most, if not all, of the genre's most influential practitioners voted in, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is facing its own midlife crisis. Just as rock originally was a hybrid of pop, blues, jazz, swing, country, R&B, gospel, and folk, the music spawned a vast multitude of subcategories in the half-century since its birth. It takes a village, but as the definition of rock expanded over the years, it has become less easy to determine who fits into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and who does not because of all the different subgenres. Now, Benji's going to read quickly from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame website. What is the criteria? A lot of people wonder, what is the criteria for getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and what are the categories? So inform our listeners.
All right, so in the performers category, this is a category that honors bands or solo artists who demonstrate musical excellence. Such a descriptor includes, but is not limited to, influence on other performers or genres, length and depth of career and catalog, stylistic innovations, or superior technique and skills.
All right, that's pretty straightforward.
The Ahmet Ertegun Award. This award, which was formerly known as the non-performer category, honors songwriters, producers, disc jockeys, record executives, journalists, and other industry professionals who have had a major influence on rock and roll. Early influencers are artists who predate the birth of rock and roll but have had a profound impact on music's evolution and its iconic artists. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Award for Musical Excellence honors performers, songwriters, and producers who have changed the course of music history. These artists have dedicated their lives to creating influential, important music infused with originality and have achieved a level of timeless distinction. Mm-hmm. And lastly, the singles. This is new last year, I guess. This is a category of recognition that focuses on the songs which have established a permanence in our history and influenced rock and roll. These songs have had an immense cultural impact and merit a place in history.
Right. So now music, folks, is very subjective. We all like different types of music, different genres. It's not like the Baseball Hall of Fame where you hit 310 for a lifetime, you hit 600 home runs. There's different benchmarks that pretty much guarantee you a place in the Baseball Hall of Fame. They don't allow 280 hitters with 1,500 hits into the Hall of Fame. So the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is very different. It doesn't necessarily go on music sales, although that's a criteria, as Benji stated, the vast catalog, influence. There's a lot of different criteria that go. So it's very subjective. So I can't think of a person other than Benji that I'd rather have on this particular episode who loves music and pretty much from the same time period that I do, say like the mid-'70s to like the mid-'90s, to discuss this. And I thought it would be fun if Benji and I sat and we talked about some of the groups or bands that are in the Hall of Fame that shouldn't be, some that should be that aren't, and maybe our own little personal Rock and Roll Hall of Shame. Now, I guess we could both agree that it's really not the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame anymore. It's more like the Music Hall of Fame, especially with like Janet Jackson, Madonna getting in recent years.
NWA.
I'm thinking It's Tricky. Run DMC. So and I don't have any problem with non-traditional rock and roll artists getting in. It should be open to all music. But there are some bands. I mean, even the other night, out of that list, Benji, who jumps off the page and says, they shouldn't be in? Of that, Def Leppard, The Cure, Janet, Stevie, Radiohead.
I don't know that I think Radiohead's body of work is worthy, while there are some of the others that we're both going to cover who are not yet in.
Right. I agree.
I honestly don't know enough about Roxy Music to have a judgment on that. And then one of these artists is actually on my list, so I can tell you now, or you can wait and hear in a minute.
You can tell us now since we're
I don't think Stevie Nicks has any place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist because she's already in as Fleetwood Mac. How many singles did she have by herself that are worthy of a body of work?
Stand back a minute. Stand back. No, I can understand it, and I think the great part about this, Benji, and I think you're the same way. We can both be very open-minded about it. Like, I'm going to name some that should be in that I don't necessarily even like, but I think their body of work. And there are some in there like Aerosmith, who I can't stand Aerosmith, but I'm not going to say they shouldn't be in there. Their body of work deserves it. I think out of the ones from the other night, I totally agree on Radiohead and their body of work. And I think Roxy Music, I think they're in there, Benji. I think they had a long career, but I think for their influence on groups like the Talking Heads, Duran Duran, a lot of groups really, they even influenced Chic in the way that they dressed. Chic used to come out, not dressed very well. When they saw Roxy Music dressed in these fancy suits, they changed their whole image and everything. So they were a very influential band, and I think that's why they're in. I don't think it's necessarily because of any major catalog with hits or anything like that, but I totally agree on Radiohead. Stevie Nicks, if we're going to talk about some female artists that I have, so maybe we can compare her to some of the solo female artists that I have and see where she stands. So let's start off by listing some groups and bands that.
Hold on.
Okay,
I got one more.
Yeah.
I'm a little conflicted. I'm a little conflicted about Def Leppard because I love Def Leppard personally.
Okay.
And I'm not convinced that was. I just don't know if that was quality as much as I love it. It's a little schlocky.
Yeah.
And I loved Hysteria and Pyromania and, Pour Some Sugar on Me and Love Bites and all these singles that were a huge part of my childhood. I just don't know if that was the real deal or not. I feel a little conflicted about Def Leppard.
Well, they got a little commercialized after Pyromania, but if you go back to like High and Dry and On Through the Night, those two albums before Pyromania, they were like when I first saw Def Leppard on MTV back in '81, I think they were putting out Bringing on the Heartache, Let It Go. They blew me away because they were real hard rock, something that I really had never seen before. I heard obviously classic and hard rock in the '70s, but to see Joe Elliott and that band on MTV in the early days before Pyromania, they were really something to see before, Photograph and Rock of Ages and Foolin'. I really, I was blown away by it. So I don't know, maybe they had some type of influence on the Motley Crues of the world and the bands later on.
And I think it comes back to what are the I mean, I just read the technical qualifications, but what is rock and roll? Is it the quality of the musicianship? Is it a feeling evoked? Is it inspiration provided to other musicians for a long time to come?
Sure.
Like, what is that? And going back to your other thing, what you said about Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is more like the Musicians Hall of Fame at this point. I think the definition of the term rock and roll has changed over the decades. Mm-hmm. Now you think rock and you're thinking like a guitar heavy, rock band, active kind of thing. And in the 50s, Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock was considered rock and roll.
Berry,
Elvis Presley was rock and roll.
Right.
And I think a lot of the artists that are on my list, when they were current and popular, you would say, if it's 1982, some of these artists that I'm going to list are going to be, well, that was rock and roll. Now, it may not be considered rock and roll right now, but you look at someone who, who is going to be on one of my lists, and I'll check them off when we get there. But today you would say, well, that's not rock and roll. That's like soft rock, easy listening. These are songs that were the tops of the charts. It was hip then.
Right.
And, I think for that reason, just because we may not look back at these artists whose body of work by requirement it has to have been, 25 years?
25 years since the first release of their first album.
By definition, these artists that are up for nomination are not meeting whatever we would consider to be quote-unquote rock and roll today.
I agree. Well, even before we jump in, when they say Elvis was the king of rock and roll, that always rubbed me the wrong way. Because to me, Chuck Berry was the king of rock and roll. Without Chuck Berry, I could go on for the whole podcast about the bands and artists that Chuck Berry influenced, including the Beatles. I think he's called the godfather of rock for some reason. Elvis is I don't get it. Maybe because Elvis's body of number one hits and top 10 singles outdoes Chuck Berry. But to me, Chuck Berry's the king, and Chuck Berry is the guy that started it all, coming out there with that guitar, strutting across the stage. To me, Chuck Berry's the king of rock and roll, but, that's all subjective as well.
You're making me think of the Back to the Future scene in '85.
Exactly.
Where they're looking for the '50s,
right,
sock hop kind of stuff, and Marty comes on, and what's rock and roll in 1985? Well, there's nothing more rock and roll than Huey Lewis and the News. Well, here we are in 2019. Would we consider Huey Lewis to be the epitome of rock and roll?
Well, I'll tell you what. Huey Lewis just might come up in conversation in a little bit.
Uh-oh.
So I'm going to let you start, Benji. Let's start with the bands that we think should be in that aren't. So give us your first one. Who should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that's still sitting on the sidelines?
All right, and I don't have these ranked, and I also have more than the number you gave me, so we'll just see.
Yeah, but that's fine. We'll get through them.
Carole King.
I agree.
Carole King. Now, she's in as a songwriter with Jerry, what's his name?
Yes, I read that myself. I forget the gentleman's last name. Something with a
Goffin.
G?
Goffin.
Yeah.
I keep forgetting Geffen or Goffin. I think it's Goffin. And if you see the Carole King story, the show, the Broadway show, you see their whole story.
Right.
But, she's in as a songwriter, and she should be in as a songwriter. But as an artist, the album Tapestry, 11 top 40 singles.
I agree. And number one song, When I Was Born. The day I was born, I feel the earth move within. So that in itself should be
That's reason
qualified.
enough right there.
So Carole King. See, I'm going to go with my first, and you might laugh, you might not. Kool and the Gang. Now, at first, people are going to be like, Kool and the Gang? Let me do a comparison. Earth, Wind, and Fire is in the Hall of Fame. They've been there a while. Kool and the Gang, 21 top 40 hits. Earth, Wind, and Fire, 15. Kool and the Gang, 10 top 10 hits. Earth, Wind, and Fire, only 7. They both only had one number one hit. Believe it or not, only one each. And that was Shining Star by Earth, Wind, and Fire and Celebration by Kool and the Gang. 30% of all released singles by Kool and the Gang made the top 40. Only 24% for Earth, Wind, and Fire. More studio albums by 2. More singles. Now, the only categories where Earth, Wind, and Fire beat up on Kool and the Gang a bit. Records sold, it's not even close. Earth, Wind, and Fire is one of the biggest selling artists of all time with 90 million records to 15 million for Kool and the Gang, and 1 Grammy for Kool and the Gang to 6 with Earth, Wind, and Fire. But if you go and look at the body of work, they've been around just as long as Earth, Wind, and Fire. They have more top 40 hits, more top 10 hits, a couple more albums. Their body of work, their catalog's a little bit bigger. I think Kool and the Gang, because this is what I mean, folks. You open the door for one, then you have to look at a comparable artist and say, wait, why aren't they in? So I think Kool and the Gang should be in. And folks, what's a bigger party anthem? Have you ever been to a party where Celebration wasn't played? I know it's a song we're all probably sick of, but they made it's like a cultural thing. They changed. I mean, could you put on the radio in the 80s or even in the 70s and not heard Kool and the Gang? From 75 to 85. They were all over.
No.
So I think Kool and the Gang should be in there, and they're my first.
I didn't know this was the amount of research you were looking for.
No, but that's okay. That's okay. No, that's fine.
All right.
Let's hear your next one.
I'm going to go with my second choice with someone who I have a feeling is on your list, so I'm going to take him first, and Warren Zevon.
Not on my list, but
Really?
I was teetering on him, but I did not put him on the list, but very deserving.
Well, he only had the one hit, Werewolves of London, really.
Right.
But he's recognized by so many superstars as one of the greatest songwriters of all time.
He was.
And that's, Influence, as we just heard, is an important...
Excitable Boy is a great album, the album with Werewolves of London. Great album.
So, that I'm taking him as my number 2.
And
I thought for sure we were going to have that one in common.
No, I won't disagree at all on that, though. My second one is the band Foreigner. Now, Foreigner, you talk about a body of work from, say, the mid-'70s to the late '80s, and then Lou Gramm did some solo stuff. Let's compare them to a group like Cheap Trick. Cheap Trick got in easily. Top 40 hits, 16 for Foreigner, 7 for Cheap Trick. Top 10 hits, 9 for Foreigner, 3 for Cheap Trick. Number 1 hits, 1 apiece. 34% of all singles made the top 40 for Foreigner, only 11% for Cheap Trick. Neither one has won a Grammy, although Foreigner has been nominated 3 times. 75 million albums for Foreigner to 20 million for Cheap Trick. But Cheap Trick has had more albums, 19 to 9. But Foreigner, from the love ballads of the 80s to the hard rock, Feels Like the First Time, Cold as Ice in the 70s, Foreigner, if bands like Cheap Trick and ZZ Top are in there, Foreigner has to be there, in my opinion. What do you think of Foreigner?
Well, I don't like them, but I don't disagree with your premise. So that would be a band that would fall into the category of bands who I don't like, but they're not on my list just because I thought the ones that I came up with were more compelling. But I'm not a fan, but you can't argue with hits, and they had a boatload of them. Right,
and I thought they were a very iconic part of the whole classic rock, mid-'70s rock scene, and then they were able to, through the disco era and through the transition in the 80s, were still able to make hits and adjust their sound and their style to 80s to still be successful and come out with chart-topping hits. I Want to Know What Love Is. And Waiting for a Girl Like You spent, I'm going to say 10 weeks at number 2, but never got to number 1. And I believe that's still the record. So that song just sat there. And I don't remember what song kept him out. I have to look that up. But Foreigner gets my knock. So you've got Zevon and Carole King, which I both fully agree with. And I've got Kool and the Gang and Foreigner. So let's hear Benji's next one.
Cher.
Oh, boy. I got a tough one with that. Why do you say Cher? What do you think? Influence? Songs?
21 top 40 singles and hit records in 5 different decades.
Yeah, I could see it.
She may not be your favorite, but I mean, look where she started. As soon as she split off from Sonny,
right? As soon as he hit the tree, no, I'm just kidding.
Before he hit the tree,
I know.
But I mean, everything from Half Breed and that, which I think was 69, 70, 71.
Take Me Home, disco in the mid 70s,
all the way to, and then look at what she did with. This is a little bit after my era of what I consider to be songs worthy of looking at. But if we're using their criteria, 25 years ago, look what she did with Believe.
Yeah, it's a good
Actually,
song.
I think that was 96, but. I mean, look what she did with Believe and the use of auto-tune.
Yes.
Look at what
she changed
for better
with the time.
Or worse.
Yeah.
She changed
with the times and
what music sounded like. And when everyone heard the auto-tune on that single, that was something that no one had ever heard before in a popular song.
I'm on the fence there. I could be talked into it if I was a voter.
Fair enough.
But
if you want to be anti-woman, so be it.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Cher because my next one is one of the top-selling female artists in the history of music, and that's Mariah Carey. If you open the door for Janet Jackson, you've got to open it for Mariah Carey, and let's do the comparison. Janet Jackson, top 40 hits, 33. Mariah, 37. Janet Jackson, top 10 hits, 23. Mariah, 28, which is 5th all time. Number 1 hits, Janet's got 10. Mariah's got 18. Mariah spent 79 weeks at number 1 with all her number 1s combined, which is still the best in United States history. She has well over 150 million in sales. Janet has 100 million. 5 Grammys and 33 nominations, and same thing for Janet, 5 out of 26. And 49%, almost half of all her released singles made the top 40. That's incredible. So, like, again, you think rock and roll, you're not thinking Mariah Carey and Janet Jackson, but when the door opened for Madonna in 2008 and Janet Jackson just the other night, Mariah Carey's got to be waiting on the doorstep. Now, Mariah came out in 90, so she is more than past the 25 years needed. So hopefully Mariah will be knocking at that door soon. She's a little bit of a whack job. Not a big fan of her personally, but, folks, we got to give credit where it's due.
I will take your Mariah Carey, and I will raise you a Whitney Houston.
She was next on my list.
Well, I stole that one.
Yeah.
One of the most successful and most powerful voices ever, unquestionably, has sold millions of records. She's got a laundry list of hits, which I'm sure you have a lot more research than I do, but I counted 30 top 40 singles.
30 top 40 singles, right? And 22 top 10s and 11 number 1s. You know what I find funny, Benji? And she's won 6 Grammys. I had a lot of people, I read a lot of the posts on Facebook about music and stuff, and people have been knocking Madonna for the longest time about she shouldn't be in there. We just named some heavy female hitters, Cher, Mariah, Janet, Whitney. Madonna puts them all to shame. Madonna has 49 top 40 hits, 38 top 10 hits, and 12 number 1 hits, 300 million records sold, and 7 Grammys. The woman belongs in there. So all you haters out there, leave Madonna alone. Obviously, Britney alone. That crazy guy on there. Leave Madonna alone. She deserves it. It's the Music Hall of Fame, folks. It's not Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, as we obviously can see by some of the recent inductees. So Madonna belongs in there. She's been in there for 11 years. Leave her alone. All right, who we got next, Benji?
I took Whitney.
Oh, you took Whitney. Okay, and I agreed. So my next one
Are you agreeing and that's your turn? No, you need to take a new one.
Either one. Well, you said you have a bunch more, so why don't you take another and then I'll go.
Okay, I will take a contemporary of Miss Houston, and
Okay.
I will say Lionel Richie.
Solo?
Solo.
Without the Commodores.
Without the Commodores.
Yeah,
I mean, 80s pop. Lionel Richie is key. 16 top 40 singles as a solo artist.
Right, starting with Endless Love with Diana Ross and going right through the 80s. I'm not going to argue that at all.
And of course he brought us, a new how to even describe what he brought us with the daughter, with Nicole.
Oh, a whole new realm of reality
There
TV.
you go.
But she cleaned up her act.
All right.
Well,
enough.
so did Paris. No, but Lionel, what's your favorite when you hear the name Lionel Richie? First song that comes to mind.
Just now it was Penny Lover, but that's
Penny Lover.
But that's not clearly. I mean, that's not his
Right.
best. I mean, All Night Long, Dancing on the Ceiling, Penny Lover,
Say You, Say Me.
Say You, Say Me is terrific. I mean, all of those are iconic 80s. I mean, you can't think of the 80s scene without Lionel Richie, and you got to give him credit in that he was never a hot mess. Look at all these other artists that are dead.
agree.
Druggies went downhill.
There's one Lionel Richie song that came out in like '84. Was a love song. It wasn't Penny Lover. And I remember holding hands at the roller skating rink with a girl I took out and skating around. And of course, you get the sweaty hands. You got to wipe your hands off on your jeans and then continue. But I remember skating around the roller rink to a Lionel Richie song, like when I was like 13 years old at the roller rink.
There's one that's a single word. It's like you or
Not You Are.
You Are. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, this was a real slow one. It wasn't one of his. It was a hit, but it wasn't one of his really big.
How about
hits.
Hello?
That one, my dad hated Hello. Every time that video came on MTV, he goes, "Shut this shit off." And he liked MTV, but he couldn't stand that song.
Is that the one with the
Blind woman with the
the
clay? Yeah. So yeah, you're not going to get an argument from me on Lionel Richie. I totally see. We're agreeing. I thought we would
have even more in common.
Yeah, Cher is the only one that I'm kind of.
All right,
I don't
fair
know.
enough.
All right, my next one, folks. The Spinners, and I'll tell you why. The OJs are in. And I love the Spinners and the OJs pretty much equally. The OJs had 8 top 40 hits. The Spinners, more than double that. 17 top 40 hits. 7 top 10 hits for the Spinners. Only 2 for the OJs. 1 number 1 hit for the Spinners. 0 for the OJs. And almost a third of all their released singles made the top 40. I love... And I know one of their biggest hits was a Frankie Valli song. What the heck? Now I can't
Working
think.
My Way Back
Working
to
My
You.
Way Back to You. Back to You in 1980. Now that song, for some reason, as much as I love it, it traumatizes me because I was in karate class in 1980. I was taking karate because I used to get bullied every once in a while when I was real little. So my mom thought I was going to be like Ralph Macchio in The Karate Kid by going to karate school. And he would the sensei, the teacher for the karate school, would always have a radio on while we were working out and doing our moves in karate school. And he traumatized the whole class. He made us punch this punching bag, this canvas bag, until our knuckles bled. And that Working My Way Back to You was on the radio that day, and it's traumatized me. Every time I hear that song, I love it. I sing along, but I think of me smashing my hands in as a 9-year-old and bleeding because he made us. It was child abuse, folks. Nowadays, you can't get away with that.
Did you bounce off of it like a rubber band man?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, what do you think of the Spinners?
I mean, yeah, sure.
All right,
I can go with that. That's not on my list, but it's a compelling argument.
All right.
Sure.
We've had guests in the past, but then came you. Their number 1 song. All right, so who do you got next on your list?
I have 3 left on my list.
All right, these are, again, folks, for those just tuning in or that tuned, who, maybe got into a little road rage and got back to the thing. We're naming artists that should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in our opinion, that aren't in. So we've gotten through a few, and Benji's going to come up with another one.
Carly Simon.
Yes, I agree.
Hugely important singer-songwriter of the 70s. That's the way I've always heard it should be. Anticipation, You're So Vain, Mockingbird, 13 top 40 singles. Clearly inspirational to a generation of female artists, no question about it. And I think she deserved to be in long before a lot of others who are in now.
I agree. Here's an ongoing debate. Is Carly Simon yacht rock or yacht rock? Not yacht rock. There's a debate in the yacht rock community. For those who don't know what yacht rock is, it's like slow, smooth, soft rock. And there's always a debate in the communities whether certain artists are yacht rock. Picture what you would be listening to on a yacht with a drink in your hand. That's yacht rock. Christopher Cross, Michael McDonald, that kind of genre of music. Now, do you think Carly Simon is yacht rock?
No.
You don't think so?
I don't.
See, I would go yacht on that. All right, so you wouldn't be listening to You're So Vain on the deck of the yacht?
I wouldn't be listening to Carly Simon, generally speaking.
So you don't like Carly Simon,
Not
but
really.
you still see Benji could be, like we said, we're open-minded. Even we may not like the artist, but we are going to give them credit where credit is due.
My favorite Carly Simon is not one of her big hits, which was "Let the River Run."
That's a good song. I like Jessie.
What was that from? The River Runs Through It movie?
That movie, I don't know what movie it was from. Look it up, folks. Google it.
I think it was.
All right. Benji mentioned a movie earlier from 1985 called Back to the Future. And my next artist who should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, who isn't, Huey Lewis and the News.
I didn't realize they weren't, or I would have put them on my list.
No, they are not in. And now let's compare them. A couple of years ago, the Cars got in. I like the Cars. Do I think they should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I'm on the fence about it. But let's compare Huey Lewis to the Cars. Top 40 hits. Cars, 8. Huey Lewis, 17. More than double. Top 10. Cars, 2. Huey Lewis, 12. Number 1 hits, Huey Lewis, 3. Cars, 0. 9 studio albums for Huey, 7 for the Cars. 1 Grammy award for Huey, and 1 Academy Award nomination, which he didn't win for that Power of Love. No Grammys for the Cars. Record sales, 30 million for Huey, 23 million for the Cars. And you could even compare Huey. I did a quick comparison where they even blow ZZ Top, who are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, out of the water when it comes to top 40 hits, top 10 hits, number 1 hits, Grammys, and sales. So, Huey, if you're listening, I know you're having some problems lately with Meniere's disease, and we hope you get better and get back out on the road. So, Huey Lewis and the News, let's get them into Cleveland.
That's an iconic part of the 80s. You can't think of 80s without something attached to Huey Lewis and the News, everything from Back to the Future to, I'm also thinking about the scene in American Psycho,
Yes.
which of course takes part in the 80s.
Exactly.
All of those great albums, the involvement with Back to the Future, that's a huge part of the 80s.
And even when MTV first started out, before Huey Lewis got really popular with the sports album and I Want a New Drug, and they had Do You Believe in Love, Working for a Living. This is back in 81, 82. So the iconic part of the MTV launch, Huey Lewis was there right from the beginning and right to the end of the decade. Jacob's Ladder, a number 1 song in 87.
One of my favorites.
I heard that today. They had the top 40 from this week in 87 on 80s on 8, for those who listen. Huey Lewis, basically, like you said, the whole decade of the 80s belonged to Huey Lewis and the News. So I think Huey should get in those doors in Cleveland. If the Cars and ZZ Top and Cheap Trick and those guys are there, Huey should be there.
The heart of rock and roll is in Cleveland.
Right, and it's still beating.
That's reason enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on, he sang about the thing.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. So Huey Lewis, we're agreeing on. So I've only got one more. So if you got a couple,
I got
hear
2. Yeah.
Okay.
Joe Cocker.
I'm going to say no on Joe.
Okay.
Unless you could convince me. You got numbers?
Of one of the iconic voices in all of rock and roll history.
Yeah.
He makes other people's music his own, and by the time he gets done with it, you forget that it was someone else's song.
True.
With a little help from my friends, Feeling All Right, The Letter, 9 top 40 singles. I think that's a talent. He wasn't on top of my list.
Right.
But I'm voting for Joe.
All right. I think I'm on the fence. Probably would say no to that one.
All right, fair enough.
My next one, and
if we agreed about everything, there wouldn't be reason to have 2 people here.
Exactly. I do have some honorable mentions after my last one. This person I cannot believe isn't in there. I even had to check just to make sure, but I knew she wasn't. Pat Benatar.
Yep, absolutely.
Long Island girl from Lindenhurst, New York, Long Island. Let's compare her to Joan Jett. Now, I love Joan Jett, and I loved seeing her in that supermarket that day and singing to her and getting a kick out of it. But let's compare her to Joan Jett, who got in last year. Top 40 hits, 15-9. Pat Benatar wins that. Top 10 hits, 4-3. Pat wins that. And 2 out of the 3 Joan Jett top 10 hits were cover songs. Tommy James and the Shondells, Crimson and Clover, and the Arrows, I Love Rock and Roll. So both of her best-selling songs were covers. Number one hits, we'll give it to Joan Jett. She had one, and Pat didn't have any. Sales, I couldn't find sales on Joan Jett. It was like all over the place. But Pat has sold 30 million records and has won 4 Grammys. No Grammys for Joan. So very comparable to Joan Jett, and even beats her in a lot of categories. Pat Benatar needs to be in Cleveland.
Absolutely, yeah, that would have been on my list, but I stopped at 8. So
Okay. Well, and who's your last one?
the Go-Go's.
Totally agree. They're in my honorable mentions. I totally agree.
Only album that hit number 1 that was written and performed only by women.
Yes.
Period. That's it.
And they said that whole California scene.
Absolutely. 5 top 40 singles, another iconic band of the 80s. Clearly was rock and roll at the time, regardless of whether you think they are now. Yeah, I mean, Go-Go's is on my list, and I think that's a...
Yeah, it's a travesty they're not in.
Absolutely.
And my honorable mentions are Depeche Mode. I think they should be in. Iron Maiden and Judas Priest in the metal category. Very,
I saw Jethro Tull a lot while researching as well.
yeah, Jethro.
Judas Priest, Jethro Tull, neither of which... I don't care for either of those bands.
Can you
but-
believe the Doobie Brothers aren't in? 16 top 40 hits.
That is surprising. Michael McDonald surely is, though, right?
I don't think so.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think so. That I didn't look up. I looked up the Doobie. I don't think Michael McDonald's in solo either. It would be hard. I would find it.
That would be a tougher call, yeah.
You know what I found too, Benji, that for some reason the Hall of Fame, while they allow hip hop in and different types of music, jazz, they shit on disco for some reason. The only real disco artist in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is Donna Summer. Mm-hmm. Blondie, you can say, kind of went disco. They're in, but they were more for their punk and their influence back in the club days of CBGB in New York City and that whole pre-Heart of Glass. They had a pretty good career before disco, but Casey and the Sunshine Band.
I would say Bee Gees before that.
The Bee Gees are in, but...
Oh, they are?
Yeah, but, they had a long career before the disco, with their rock and soft rock. And but, that transitions is one more that I wrote up a little bit of a bio, and we'll see what you think about it. The band Chic has been on the ballot 11 times, and they're still not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But Nile Rodgers, the co-founder of Chic, is in for musical excellence, and he kind of feels bad. He says it's basically like inviting me onto the lifeboat and leaving my family behind. He feels bad that he got in for, and he's gone on to produce a lot of things for other people over the years, which I'll get to. But Chic had 9 albums. They only had 5 top 40 hits and 2 number 1 hits. But the team of Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards, Bernard Edwards passed away in 96. He was the bass player and co-wrote all the Chic songs. They wrote and produced Sister Sledge's album, We Are Family, and all the great songs on that, We Are Family, He's the Greatest Dancer, which then spawned Getting Jiggy With It 20 years later. Will Smith sampled that song, which they wrote, and that went to number 1, almost 20 years after Chic's heyday. They wrote Diana Ross's most successful album, which included Upside Down and I'm Coming Out, and I'm Coming Out went to number 5, and Upside Down went to number 1. And I'm Coming Out was sampled by the Notorious B.I.G. on More Money, More Problems, and that went to number 1. Chic's song Good Times ranked the 229th best song of all time on Rolling Stone's Greatest Songs of All Time. Chic was sampled, Good Times from Chic was sampled in Rapper's Delight, which is the key track in the development and popularity of hip-hop. Good Times was also sampled by Grandmaster Flash and was an influential track in early turntablism, DJing back in the day. Another one, Bites the Dust from Queen, was inspired by Chic's Good Times, the bass line by John Deacon in that song. In an interview, bassist Bernard Edwards of Chic stated that Queen record came out because the Queen bass player spent a lot of time hanging out with us in the studio and was inspired by Bernard's chucking, they called it. He had a very unique way of playing the bass, and you can hear that in the song. Blondie's 1980 song Rapture was not only influenced by Good Times by Chic, but was a direct tribute to Chic. So you just see on and on. John Taylor from Duran Duran said their top 10 hit single Rio was influenced by Edwards of Chic. The Smiths' Johnny Marr cited Chic as an informative influence of his work. Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards were inducted to the Songwriters Hall of Fame in June of 2016. Nile Rodgers also produced Let's Dance for David Bowie, An In Excess, Original Sin, The Reflex, and Notorious by Duran Duran. Like a Virgin from Madonna. He's worked with B-52s, Mick Jagger, the list goes on. And Edwards worked with Robert Palmer on his successful albums. Joe Cocker, Missing Persons, Air Supply, Jody Watley, Duran Duran, Rod Stewart. So these guys were not only influential, they were just great musicians. And I think, although Nile Rodgers is in, I wanted to make a special shout out to Chic. After 11 nominations, I think it's a travesty that with all their influence on hip-hop and every genre of music, from David Bowie to Robert Palmer, these guys need to be in. And that's I'm getting off my soapbox now about Chic.
You make a compelling case. I can't really argue with that. What about country?
What about them?
Well, I mean, we're talking about every other genre that's in. What about, or even country crossover? How about Dolly Parton?
Well, doesn't country have their own Hall of Fame?
They do, but are we segregating that particular genre and then everything else under the sun?
I don't know. Would they let a rock star in their Hall of Fame?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of crossover right now between country and rock.
Yeah, because there's really no rock left. No, but you're saying like Juice Newton back in the day when she was hitting
Dolly
the charts.
Parton, 9 to 5.
I don't know. That's tough. Since they have their own, well, I think, does hip-hop have its own Hall of Fame too?
I don't know. Do they?
I don't know. I'm just saying. So, where do we draw the line?
I see hip-hop as being as connected to the rock, the rock
right,
and
it's a
roll
subgenre.
phrase
Sure.
as country is.
I don't know. That's tough. That's a tough one. I don't know if we should start opening up the doors to... Well, I guess there are some country stars from the 50s and 60s in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So why not?
Elvis Presley had a huge...
So why not? I guess, all right. So I'd have to be open-minded. I don't know enough about country music. I'll be honest with you. It's never been at the top of my list, so I don't know. But I guess we have to be open to it, right?
I think it's, apples and apples.
All right, so I came up with 5 bands or artists that are in the Hall of Fame but have no business being there. And I know you came up with a list yourself. So do you want to...
Well, I came up with 6, but one of them was Stevie Nicks, who we talked about.
Okay, so
now
I've
we
got
both
5.
have 5.
Okay, so who do you got?
I'm going to start with Kiss.
That's my first one, too.
Kiss's performance art. And it's very successful. It's also, a merchandising... I don't know the word I'm looking for, but the merchandising has been huge since the 70s, and the lunchboxes and the cartoons and all that stuff, and they've been massively successful. And you could do you could write a textbook on what Gene Simmons has done to market his brand.
Yes.
For 45 or more years. It's extremely impressive. But the question is, are they great musicians? Do they have a huge amount of hits?
2.5 decent songs and many decades of pointless touring is what I wrote.
Well, I mean, there you go.
I'm in total agreement. I think, like you said, the marketing, the cartoons, and the touring is where the money is, and that's why they've been doing it so long. I don't know. I think Alice Cooper started that whole makeup crazy stuff. Probably did it better than anybody because usually the original usually does it better. I liked one album from Kiss, and it's the year they took the makeup off. It was that song Lick It Up, Heaven's on Fire. One good album in the mid-'80s, 85, and didn't like him before. Although that song, I want to, the one where it sounds like disco, where they went a little disco. Not Rock and Roll All Night. I can't think of it right now. But it was always played at this amusement park, Adventureland, back in the day when I was a kid. I used to hear it. Why is the name slipping my mind right now? I'll think of it. Actually, I'm going to look it up because it's going to drive me crazy for the rest of... it's like when Kiss went disco.
I don't know what that would be. Is that like when the Stones went disco?
With Miss You, yeah, stuff like that. I Was Made for Loving You.
I don't know that one.
I was made for loving you, baby. You were made for loving me. You don't remember that?
No.
Always on at the amusement parks in like 79. I remember hearing that all over the amusement parks.
I was in 0 amusement parks in 1979. Sorry.
Were you born?
I was.
Okay.
But I was not dancing to Kiss's version of disco in an amusement park. So.
And then that song Beth, that terrible ballad Beth.
I enjoy Beth. I like
you
Beth.
Enjoy Beth. Okay. So we like some Kiss, but we both agree that they shouldn't be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
You wanted the best. You got the best.
You got the best. All right. So we both had Kiss for our first. My second one was Donovan. And I wrote a little paragraph. Donovan had a few decent songs like Sunshine Superman, Mellow Yellow, and Hurdy Gurdy Man. but he's a very low-grade Bob Dylan at best. The Baseball Hall of Fame for years has resisted inducting above-average players who hit 280 or won 175 games over a career. Baseball reveres its Hall of Fame in almost every case for someone whose career performance was extraordinary. Making it into the Baseball Hall of Fame, folks, feels like a real honor. I don't mean that making it into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame isn't, but I do mean that it is diminished if your fellow inductees include Donovan. He's a 260 hitter at best.
I certainly have no argument to make on his behalf.
I don't I think it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Donovan got in, and I had the radio on, and they said, we're going to, and when Donovan came, I almost fell to the ground. I'm like, how did this guy get in? I think there's some payola going on. All right, so who's your third?
Laura Nero.
That's up on the top of everybody's list I've seen through my research. I don't have her on mine, but I agree.
From the research I did, because not only do I know nothing about her, I hadn't even heard of her.
I don't really know
I had
much
to
either.
read up to see, what the story was and what am I missing. And, apparently she was a good songwriter for more than one performer, and wrote some hits.
Is she in as a performer or a writer?
She's in as a performer. That's my problem.
And Chic isn't.
Right. And look at all these other songwriters who, I believe she's in as a performer. That's my understanding. Right. But then look at someone like Burt Bacharach.
Right. Exactly.
A true legend who is not in. So, no chart hits of worth mentioning.
You won't get an argument out of me, so we agree on that. My third one is the Dave Clark Five. Now, there were some people that actually liked these guys, and now they're remembered for Glad All Over and Because. The rest, folks, is a big handful of hits in a little more than an 18-month heyday, so they were a flash in the pan. They're clumpy, simple songs made up of mostly entirely monosyllable, as if the Beatles never progressed beyond Love Me Do. That's basically the Dave Clark Five. They're a Beatles ripoff that never progressed beyond Love Me Do. Very simple, monosyllabic, clumpy. I don't understand how they're in there.
So you like them?
Oh, I love them. Yeah, so I'm not saying they didn't sound good, but I don't think they should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Okay. Can't argue that.
All right, who we got?
George Harrison as a solo artist.
I'm on the fence. I can see arguments on both sides because I read a lot about it. Because pretty much after his 1971, 72 album, he didn't really have a good solo career.
I mean, he did Got My Mind Set on You. That was his
later one in '87, yeah. But in between that and My Sweet Lord, what did he do?
Nothing.
I agree.
He's in as a Beatle, obviously. Right. I just don't see it.
Where do you stand on John Lennon and Paul McCartney in as solo artists?
I think both of them did significantly more as solo artists. Yeah. And Ringo.
Right. Ringo, you think did more than, with his all-star band and everything else?
Yeah. Yeah. I think of the four, George is probably number 4, but I think Lennon and McCartney definitely had a body of work as solo artists, and clearly
Paul had a big one.
Absolutely, and Lennon's would have clearly have continued. Right. So, yeah, that's a big sport.
I'm on the fence. I'm not going to say yes or no. Based on what I read, I would probably lean towards I agree with you, but I'm still, just because of the nostalgia for George Harrison, which is probably why he got in, I'm kind of on the fence on that one.
But he's in. He's a Beatle.
I know, but I'm just saying, no, I'm like, he's in as a Beatle, right. Okay. My fourth one is Percy Sledge. Now,
that is one of mine.
A guy, he had one top 10 hit. His other material is forgettable to everyone, basically except hardcore record collectors. He wasn't a great live performer. His only hit has a very out-of-tune horn section, and he got in on his first nomination. Don't get me wrong, folks. I still turn the radio up every time I hear When a Man Loves a Woman. It's one of the great gospel records of rock and roll. Take Time to Know Her is just as good. But it's possible to love those records and still think they don't elevate Percy into the Hall of Fame. So not taking away anything from his voice, from that song, but Hall of Fame worthy, I don't think so.
Famer. Yep, and that's why he was on my list as well.
So we agreed 2 out of 4 so far with Kiss and Percy.
And I have one more.
Okay.
Buffalo Springfield.
Okay, I could see that.
It was sort of an early all-star, an all-star group.
Right.
But I mean, other than For What It's Worth,
they weren't really worth anything.
Right. I mean, what are we talking about?
I agree with that. I'll agree on that one. My fifth one and final one was Cheap Trick. Now, Cheap Trick, emerged in the mid-'70s with their, actually they were bigger in Japan at first than they were here in the United States. They were propelled to success in Japan. They broke in here with the song Surrender. It's a staple of classic rock radio, which never got past number 62 in the Hot 100. They have a lead guitarist who dresses like Pee Wee Herman's New Wave brother. They've played the game right, so I'll give it, with their touring, and I think they played the game right. But it is telling, folks, that their biggest single was the generic 80s power ballad called The Flame. And it's not the first time a band will be best known for their worst song. That cover of Don't Be Cruel hasn't held up too well either. So based on, I did the comparisons before with Foreigner and these other bands, Cheap Trick doesn't stack up. Huey Lewis is even better. I mean, I don't know how they got in. They're very gimmicky, like Kiss, not with the makeup and all that, but I just don't see it. Not that their songs aren't catchy. I Want You to Want Me, another amusement park song from when I was a kid on the Ferris wheel and everything else, but I don't see it. I don't see the body of work isn't there. In my opinion. But that's what it's all about.
I like Cheap Trick, so I will...
You'll give me the zero on that.
I'm going to abstain.
So we're going to wrap it up
I'll vote present.
Yeah. We're going to wrap it up with a few inductees. Now, if Benji and I were going to open up a Hall of Shame here in Atlanta or Smyrna, a rock and roll or a music Hall of Shame, we're going to name some artists that we would induct immediately. We don't have to get into the deep explanation.
This is a speed round.
It's kind of a speed round. Give me your first.
Milli Vanilli.
Because of the lip syncing?
Yeah, the people
the songs were good, though.
The people we saw were not singing.
But the songs were good.
Well, too bad.
Okay, I'm going Tiffany. Folks, the moles, the cheesy cover songs. I don't need to say anymore. You like Tiffany. Benji's looking like
I don't know that I'd say I like her, but I think that what she and Debbie Gibson did for pop music in 86, 87, I guess it was 87, 88, I think was pretty big. And I think the mall tours, as much as it may not have been your scene, I think was pretty important to a lot of kids.
Right, but it bothers me and I think it bothers Deborah Gibson herself, when she's putting that same, Debbie Gibson wrote her own shit.
Agreed. But
she
it was
didn't do bad versions of Beatles songs. I saw him standing there, and that Tommy James and the Shondells.
I Think We're Alone Now.
I Think We're Alone Now.
She did do Could Have Been. That was original. I don't think she wrote it, but she made
I don't know.
it.
Debbie was so in another league.
Debbie was, I agree, she was on a different level.
All right, so you got Tiffany. I got Tiffany. You've got...
Kevin Federline.
Yes, that's a good one. That's Britney's ex-husband for those who...
that was just completely pointless.
Weird Al Yankovic.
Oh, no. I was going to bring him up as a potential Hall of Famer.
Come on. I sit and I make song parodies all day about my wife around the house, and it's funny, but...
Well, he sells more.
Yeah, well, I haven't tried to sell anything. I used to sit in school and make parodies about kids at the lunch table, and everybody used to laugh. I don't think it's very hard.
I think that first of all, he's a really good musician, even
Right.
though his big thing is the accordion. He's a very talented musician. I think that to make good parody takes intelligence and good songwriting.
Okay.
I don't agree, and I think that it is non-traditional. But I think he's very skilled, and I may or may not have tickets to see him this summer at Chastain.
Oh my
so there.
God! All right, your next one.
Yoko Ono.
I agree. I don't have her on my list, but
Ugh,
she sounds like nails on a chalkboard.
awful.
I love that Double Fantasy album, but when it gets to the tracks where she sings, I have to skip.
Oh, it's just useless.
I've got Vanilla Ice. Come on,
Yeah,
terrible.
probably
Compare
so.
him to a white rapper to Eminem.
Right. No, absolutely.
He had no business.
was it even rap?
No, I don't know what it was. All right, speed round. Your next one.
Rebecca Black.
Yes. Okay, I'll agree with that. I've got Jessica Simpson.
Oh, I don't know about that. She had
She's
several
terrible,
albums.
though. She was terrible.
Her sister is terrible.
Ashley.
Yeah.
We'll put them both in together.
I don't agree with that one.
Okay, what do you got?
I have as my last. I was going to do sort of. It's a subcategory.
Okay.
How many more you got?
I've got a couple, but we'll sprinkle them in.
All right. I have three people in the subcategory actors who should not have tried.
I have the same thing.
Okay.
I've got Bruce Willis,
Yes.
Don Johnson,
Okay.
and that's it. And I wrote in parentheses, Eddie Murphy and Patrick Swayze did a great job.
See, I put Eddie Murphy in my list.
A Party All the Time? That was a great song.
He can't sing.
He held that note for about 30 seconds.
He cannot sing.
What do you think of Patrick Swayze? She's Like the Wind.
I love that.
I think he did a great job. Jack Wagner did a great job.
All I need.
Rick Springfield did a great job.
Agreed.
So it's basically the only one we disagree on. You're going with Eddie Murphy too.
But I have one more.
Who?
William Shatner.
Yeah, but that was more of a joke, wasn't it?
I don't know. I heard he was doing a country album this year.
Shatner. Okay.
So,
And I would put Kiss in the Hall of Shame, but we've already beat that to death. So just rewind. And my last two, just thrown in for the hell of it, Justin Bieber and Meghan Trainor. All about that bass and all that shit.
Oh, I don't agree at all on Meghan Trainor. I think she's a very good musician, and she writes every bit of that stuff.
I would be embarrassed to admit that I wrote all about that bass.
That's clearly not her best stuff, but I think Meghan Trainor is a true musician. And I thought about Bieber, but Bieber has done some very impressive things, albeit it's with 9-year-olds.
Right.
But there's an occasional song that's got a catchy hook to it. I'm not a fan. But right. I don't know about Bieber, and I definitely don't agree with Meghan Trainor.
Well, so I'd say we mostly agreed. We had a few disagreements, which makes the podcast fun. Folks, in the show notes, tell us who you think. Who should be in that Hall of Fame, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, who's been sitting on the sidelines? Who should be kicked the hell out of there? And tell us about your music Hall of Shame. We want to hear you weigh in. Don't forget to vote for the mutant of the week. The poll will be up on Tuesday and will run through Saturday. For our new listeners, in case you don't know what other platforms we're on, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Radio Public, CastBox, and all of our shows go over to YouTube, or just say to your Echo device, that is, Alexa, play the podcast A Bunch of Malarkey, and she will play our most current episode. Benji, thank you so much for coming in. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for the invite.
Nothing like talking music with a guy who knows his stuff. So we really appreciate it.
And you couldn't find one, but I was happy to come anyway.
Exactly. So I just said, all right, let's get him in here. So, folks, we hope you enjoyed the show. Again, we want to hear your feedback. Let us know about your Rock and Roll Hall of Fame snubs, who should be in, who shouldn't be in, Hall of Shame. And even when you're home, folks, enjoying your music, relaxing, and just soaking up that music. You still have to beware. And why is that, folks? Because it's a shit show out there. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been A Bunch of Malarkey. Take care, everybody. Have a great week.